And good evening, foodists, food friends. How y'all doing? So, we had our exam. It was a bit of a mess, but whatever. I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to grade them yet, but hopefully by next Monday we'll have it back. Whatever, fine. And schedule-wise, probably supposed to have another exam next week. I'm going to probably do this next exam a little bit differently, but regardless. So, we have been covering the basic macromolecules of food. That is, the kinds of stuff that you should be eating, i.e. not metal, not glass, not dirt. And now what we're going to start doing is thinking about how we actually convert that food into usable energy. And it is a grand musical or opera of lots of different players and lots of different parts. And work with me, patience. We're going to break this thing down into easily digestible chunks that you will be able to, little bite-sized pieces that you won't even need a knife to eat them. You can even eat them with like a toothpick. Ha. And what we're going to do is start out talking about some of the fundamental mechanisms behind energy, flow, and some of the basic chemistry of this. So here's where it begins. We're going to start out once again with a basic chart of sorts that kind of lays out what we're talking about. And then from there, we'll get into some of the details. So, if you will, grab a piece of paper and chart with me. Yay. This is our grand discussion, our grand chart of metabolism. And we're going to primarily look at the breakdown of sugar. Now, as we do this and get it more fully developed, we'll be able to talk about how we break down proteins and fats, but it all begins with sugar, which really, is the basic part of everyone's diet. My pixie stick diet. So, when we start thinking about metabolism, we have two broad categories. But to get into it, we have to get back to actual physics and not biochemistry. And that is essentially the physics of thermodynamics. And there are two laws of thermodynamics, and they are as follows. They are the following. The first law, and because these are laws, you can't use contractions or nothing. You got to write them out clearly. Whatever. The first law of thermodynamics is energy cannot be created or destroyed. Ha! That means that energy doesn't just poof, come about magically, and it also doesn't just poof, disappear. It is going to be coming from some things, and it's going to be moving on to something else. We can change forms of it, but you can't just get rid of it. I mean, the easiest way to sort of dump energy is in the form of heat. But this is, the notion that you can convert energy into different forms. Like you can have a steam engine where you can generate steam and then use it to drive a turbine, and you can make wheels move, or you can make electricity, or a gasoline engine, or all those different kinds of examples of what we call potential and kinetic energy. Not relevant, fine. The second law of thermodynamics is really a good bit more important in our discussion. The second law of thermodynamics states the following, and that is this: all systems tend towards entropy, which is a $15 word for saying disorganization. So, what this means is we can look at systems and tell whether they are moving in the direction that thermodynamics would dictate, that is, falling apart, or if they are becoming more complicated and actually increasing in organization. And you can do that, you're violating the law, but in this world, as long as you pay, you can violate the law. All right? So we've got a little bribery system going on here. As long as you put energy into a system, you can actually decrease its entropy and increase its organization. A little bit like cleaning up one's room, is that you got to put some energy into it, you put your socks away, you dust, and then you say, I'm done. Now, with the analogy, you can close the room up, not touch it, but come back a couple of years later, it's going to be dusty, there's going to be bugs all over the place, there'll be little, God knows what droppings, I don't want to know about it, a rat's nest in your pillow. Stuff does tend to disorganize. The only way you're going to keep your room nice and pristine clean is every couple of months you come in, you dust, you air it out, you clean it up, beat all the little mice on the head. So you got to put energy into systems just to maintain them. If you leave them alone, the thermodynamics dictates, the second law says, it is going to start heading downhill. And it takes a while, no doubt about it, but stuff falls apart. That's the direction we can predict. Now, what this means is to build stuff up, to organize, you got to put in energy. And that leads us to our actual breakdown or consideration of metabolism. So this is the chart we're going to work on. And here we go. All right. So, when we start thinking about metabolism, it is kind of like a coin with two sides, side A, side B, head side, tail side. So we're going to ping pong back and forth between these two sides of metabolism. On the left, we've got what's known as anabolic metabolism. On the right, we have what's known as catabolic metabolism. And what we're going to do is really just kind of go back and forth, bing, 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 between these two different lists and sort of contrary one versus the other. And here's how we can define them first. Anabolic metabolism can be happily defined rather simply, but I think it works, is taking simpler molecules and generating more complex molecules. Now, the catabolic metabolism is the exact opposite, where we're going from the more complex to the simpler. We're breaking stuff down. So we got these two different sides of the same coin here. Anabolic is building stuff up, building up muscles, making more proteins, growing. Catabolic is breaking stuff down, where we're taking things and breaking them apart. And so, just in a very simple way of thinking about this, digestion is an excellent example of catabolic metabolism, where you take a very complex molecule like proteins, meat, carbohydrates, and you break them down into simpler molecules, and you're extracting energy from that. Anabolic metabolism is the opposite, where you're taking in small components and building up these large macromolecules, building muscles. One way to think about this is anabolic steroids. Folks that take steroids are going to roid up. They take anabolic steroids. Now, just as a point, anabolic steroids will not turn you into the Hulk. If you inject them, you don't become a monster. You have to actually continuing to exercise, but what they'll do is they will allow you to recover faster, And you shouldn't be taking steroids, so don't do it. But anabolic steroids are making people bulk up. Catabolic steroids, ain't nobody takes catabolic steroids. We do catabolism just fine in terms of running yourself down. That's just drinking, carousing, smoking, staying up late. That's catabolic. Hey. So that's the two different systems then. And that's the way I think about it, the way I remember which one's which, is anabolic is the building up. Okay? Now, we start breaking this apart further. Let's think about the thermodynamic favorability. As we said, the second law of thermodynamics dictates that all systems tend towards disorganization or breakdown. That means that the anabolic system is actually violating the second law of thermodynamics. It is, therefore, thermodynamically unfavorable and that means then sort of a subheading is it's going to be requiring an energy input energy input is required and we refer to this as being a non-spontaneous reaction. And you'll see in a moment, catabolic reactions is referred to as spontaneous, while our general term of, or a notion of spontaneous means that it happens just on a whim, or it happens immediately. You're being spontaneous, lovely. In this term, it's not quite that, but it means that's the direction it's going to go. And so we refer to these reactions as being non-spontaneous. Now, the exact opposite is over here, in that these are thermodynamically favorable. They are generating an energy output, and they are referred to as being spontaneous. So, we now have our master list. One final thing is that there are a class of chemical reactions that are associated with these things, and we can make this last point. It kind of ties in with what we'll be talking about in a moment. These reactions, that is, anabolic reactions, tend to be what we call in the chemistry biz reduction reactions. And catabolic reactions tend to be what we call the biz oxidation reactions. And that means we need to define oxidation and reduction. And how about we try this? This is a good definition and a good way to remember it. Oxidation is loss of electrons. Reduction is gain of electrons. And the clever mnemonic for this, of course, would be oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. Ha! Oil rig. Now, another way to remember this, if you like this better, is gain of electrons is reduction. Or actually, loss of electrons is oxidation. Gain of electrons is reduction. And then you're supposed to say to yourself, Leo the lion says grr. Except that's not how you spell grr, G-E-R. So I can't do that. Oil rig. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. And that's an important thing to think about, is that when we are breaking foods down, carrying out catabolic reactions. We're carrying out oxidation reactions. We're pulling electrons from food. When we're building things up, we're making new covalent bonds. We have to add electrons into the system. That's going to require reduction reactions. So don't worry about the term reduction being smaller. That's not what it is. Reduction is a gain of electrons, a reduction reaction. So with this in mind, we can start really thinking about some metabolic pathways. Now, one other aspect of this is that we're going to focus primarily in this course, and pretty much is the general way of thinking about these things. We're going to be looking at some catabolic pathways. In terms of anabolic pathways, we're going to talk a little bit about photosynthesis, which is a classic anabolic pathway, but primarily we're going to spend our time talking about the breakdown of foodstuffs. And we start out talking about the breakdown of sugar. So once we kind of get the framework set up for breaking down sugar, we can then begin fitting in where we break down or how we break down fats and proteins and all these things that you can eat. So it's a grand tour here. And I like to think of it as sort of a grand opera. We'll be going through the cast of characters here in just a bit. There's one last little piece of this puzzle that we need to get into. And it has to do with how we carry out chemical reactions. So, what we're going to do is primarily focus on the pathways and mechanisms of catabolic reactions. So, I'm going to erase this stuff. We'll talk about anabolic reactions because they are important, but the catabolic reactions are how we extract energy from food, and that's more relevant to our immediate discussion. All right, so here then is the conundrum. We've got reactions that we say are spontaneous, but as I said, that's a bit of a misnomer. Spontaneous doesn't mean that they're going to go like that. Spontaneous means that's the thermodynamic favorability. And if we think about the way the universe works, say you got a bag of sugar. Now that bag of sugar is going to break down eventually into carbon dioxide and water. And it's going to give off heat. If you let it sit for, say, a couple of thousand years, it will slowly break down. The amount of heat that is given off will slowly be released. And that's all well and good. Now, on the other hand, if you take that sugar and you grind it up really, really fine, powdered sugar, and you then disperse it into a room, I'd say this room, about this size, probably pretty good. Blow it everywhere so you have this real fine powder of sugar. And now, take a match and strike it and watch what happens. Actually, don't do that. That is what causes grain elevator explosions. There is a tremendous amount of energy, and if you release it all at once, boom! It's really big. Some of you maybe have seen Mythbusters, where there's the game of taking either sawdust or even better, non-fat dried milk, powdered milk, and you blow it out of a tube, and then you strike a match to it. Whoosh! I mean, this thing goes up like crazy. And that underscores the point that catabolic type reactions can be thought of as fire. That is a classic kind of catabolic reaction. We're taking the complex carbohydrate cellulose and then breaking that down into carbon dioxide and water. Fire is, in fact, rapid oxidation. Now, let's think about fire for a moment. You can set up a great big bonfire, and just as a little point, going to Texas A&M University back in the day, around Thanksgiving, the student body would gather and be participating in the clear cutting of a forest and take these great big logs and build a bonfire that probably still holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest bonfire. And they used to do this every year until, I think, 1999 or so. And it collapsed and killed people, and that's bad. But prior to that point, they used to build a gigantic bonfire, and then they would soak it in kerosene. And then on Wednesday night before the Thanksgiving football game. Everybody gathered around, and people, the marching band and the yell leaders would come out carrying torches, sort of like in a Frankenstein movie. And at a given point, the head yell leader would throw his torch onto this 70, 80 foot tall log pile, or looks like sort of a wedding cake of tears, and it would go whoosh, and from half a mile away you could feel the heat on your face, and this thing would burn for days. Now, the point is, you can get this massive amount of heat released, but you have to strike a match. And here is a good demo of what we're talking about. Igor, I need my fire.
Yes, sir.
Putting on my safety glasses. All right. So, what I have here is a sheet of, looks like paper. It's something called nitrocellulose. It's quite flammable. And watch what happens to it. This is a little bit of heat we got to add to it. Thank you, Igor. I just like setting that stuff on fire. But it does give a reasonable example of rapid combustion. But the point is, while as a sheet of paper, this is the liner from it, it's actually flammable and probably a little dangerous, but it's reasonably stable, okay? You have to add a little bit of energy, whoosh, to get that big energy out. And we can diagram this in the following way. By making an energy versus chemical reaction diagram, we get something that looks like this. So here is on the y-axis the energy in the system. And we're just going to say high and low. And then we're going to have the reaction progress on the x-axis. And we're going to start up here with glucose, sugar, pixie stick. And we're going to end up down here at the end of the reaction with carbon dioxide and water. All right? Now, that's basically what we just did. And what comes out is the energy, because you can't lose it. And we got the energy released. Pretty big. But we actually, this is a little bit disingenuous because you have to have a match. So what really is, the glucose is up here, but we have to add a bit of heat to get over the speed bump, as it were. There you go. This is known as the energy of activation. Also known as the activation energy. All right, this is the match. So now, herein lies a fundamental problem of biochemistry. The energy of activation to break down food molecules is not trivial. Now, you don't have to have a whole lot of it. You don't have to have the heat on for very long. You saw just that match or that lighter flare was just a second. But you do have to have some fairly serious heat. And not to be overly exact, but as I say, for covalent bonds of organic molecules, you're talking about 450 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature at which you can get things to actually catch on fire. 450 degrees is what it's going to take to get over this hump. Now, you don't have to have it on for very long. You don't have to have a whole lot of it. It's not like a massive blaze or a gigantic hot plate. It can be a little spark, but let's face it, neither you nor I, nor any organisms on the planet, can generate that kind of energy and that kind of heat. We can't do it. About the best I can do is probably, if push were to come to shove, I can run about 104 degree fever and not suffer, serious damage. Little babies might be able to go 105, 106. Much above that, you're going to be screwed up. Because all our molecules are very delicate, made up of all those weak-ass bonds, of course. And so consequently, if you have temperatures much above, really for you and I, 120, you start to screw us up. We won't survive it. So how do we get enough energy to generate this energy of activation to get reactions to go forward? Glad you asked. What we do is take advantage of a clever chemistry trick, something known as a catalyst. And let's see. I'm trying to figure out how I can write here. Sure. Can you see me over here? Yeah, all right. A catalyst, that's the key. Because a catalyst lowers the energy of activation. That's what a catalyst does. It's going to lower the energy of activation low enough that it can be carried out at body temperature. And enzymes are the name we give to protein catalysts. So we kick around the term enzymes and enzyme treatments and enzyme therapy and taking enzymes and things. An enzyme is simply a protein catalyst. This is a little truth in advertising. Not all enzymes are proteins, but pretty much all are. You don't need to worry about enzymes that are non-proteins. All right, so an enzyme is a protein catalyst. It's able to lower the energy of activation, thereby allowing a chemical reaction that would normally require a brief moment of 450 degrees to take place at temperatures in my body. Now, further, what we do is rather than taking glucose and in one fell swoop turn it into carbon dioxide and water, like setting fire to a piece of paper, we're going to do something that looks more like this, where we got a series of little bumps. Beeps, beeps. Each one of these is individual reactions. Each one of them has a fairly low energy of activation, and it allows us to break down molecules in kind of a stepwise fashion that allows us to actually be able to extract the energy and hold on to it more conveniently. Having this massive ba-boom is very difficult to control, but if you kind of squirt it out in little bits, we can capture it all up. That is the key to carrying out metabolic activity. Now, another way of thinking about this energy of activation biz and what a catalyst might do is, let's think about this. Imagine we've got a parking lot that's on the edge of a cliff. And you take your roommate's car, put it in neutral, get it on this parking lot, drive it to the edge of the parking lot overlooking the cliff. Now, hopefully there's one of those parking lot bumper concrete bars, about that high, all right? So you back the car, or you front the car up to it, boom, and your roommate's pretty cool. No problem. It's in neutral. And now you're going to get out and go to the back of the car and start kind of going, pushing on the car. Now, your roommate's going, all right, no big deal. This is kind of what the energy would be at, body temperature. But what if you get like a couple of guys and you start really pushing on this thing? That's sort of the temperature you might get in the oven, and then all of a sudden you can imagine, kaboom, oh, you got it over for the wheels, kaboom, oh, and blows up. You destroyed your roommate's car, sorry, That would be the equivalent of raising the temperature up. Now, imagine this. We have your roommate's new car. You still climb him in to take him to the parking lot by the cliff. And instead of having a parking lot bumper bar this high, it's actually a squishy rubber thing. It's only about that high. And now you put that up there and you say, hey, look, I don't have a football team with me. It's just me. Boom, 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 boom. Lowering that parking lot bar is what an enzyme does. It lowers the energy of activation, and it allows the movement of molecules and the energy that's in the system at room temperature or body temperature. It provides it with sufficient energy to get over the hump. So that's how we can begin carrying out metabolism. And what else is there to think about with that? We actually know the mechanism. I have a pretty good model of the mechanism of enzymes, and it works more or less like this. If you think about breaking a bond, we're actually going to apply torsional stress to that bond. That's how you begin breaking it. And as you recall, we said that all of these break apart reactions are hydrolysis reactions when we're they're hydrolysis reactions. When we're going to be building things, we start carrying out the condensation reactions, where we look to see how you can add a molecule of water and generate a molecule of water when you're breaking something down. So that's the condensation reaction, that's dehydration reaction regardless. This hydrolysis reaction. So water molecules are always around, and they're going to be punching things and breaking things apart. And so you can think a little bit about an enzyme as having the ability to grab that bond when it's in a three-dimensional configuration that is most susceptible to breaking. It's actually called the transition state. You can kind of think of it like this. Let's say we got molecule A and molecule B, and eventually it's going to generate A and B, and it goes through this flexing where this is the transition state, and then finally it pops. Now, it's most of the time in this state. Maybe 5% of the time it's in the transition state, and then we end up with the product. But as you start to heat things up, you start flexing it more and more, and it's actually in this state 50% of the time or something, and it starts to break. Now, what an enzyme does is when this molecule ends up in the transition state, it grabs it and holds it there. So enzymes work by grabbing the material and holding it tight in this transition state. And one of the terms in enzymology that we use is the stuff the enzyme is acting on is known as the substrate. I'm not sure how often we'll be using that term, but that way if I say substrate, you know what it is. So the enzyme binds the substrate at its transition state. Now imagine an enzyme that might catalyze or use me as a substrate, in that I'm walking down the street and most of the time I keep my hands over my stomach to keep little monkeys from punching me in the stomach. But every once in a while I check my back pocket to make sure my glasses are still there. But then I'm back here. So most of the time I'm like this. But every once in a while, glasses, good. Now, we got all those monkeys floating around. They're looking to punch me in the stomach, but no, they can't do it because I got my hands in front of me. Check. Now we throw an enzyme into the reaction. An enzyme is going to be wandering around. When I get my hands behind my back, it's going to hold my hands behind my back. And then the monkeys can punch me in the stomach and I throw up. That's how enzymes might work, is they're binding in this temporary moment. They're going to hold the molecule there. So the water molecules can punch it all out. All right. That gets us pretty far down the road to some of the basics of metabolism. We'll pick back up in a few more lectures about how we can actually start using this in some of these different pathways. And that's all I know. I'll talk to you later. I'm Dr. G. I'm out.